Told that mainstream publishing houses weren't interested in stories about Black girls, first-time author Kai Harris fought to write a story about KB, an 11-year-old Black girl and her older sister who are sent to live with their grumpy grandfather after their father dies of a drug overdose and their family loses their home in Detroit. Tiny Reparations, an imprint of Random House, published Kai's book, and Kai Harris proved that a book that is just about Black girlhood does have an audience, and that Black girlhood does matter. I sit down with Kai to discuss her acclaimed novel coming up next.
Live from Los Angeles, this is the Special Report with Areva Martin.
Kai Harris is a professor of creative writing at Santa Clara University, and as a writer, she uses her voice to uplift the Black community through realistic fiction centered on the Black experience. Her new book, What the Fireflies Knew, has been given rave reviews by pretty much everybody that's picked the book up, and I'm super excited to be sitting down with Kai to talk about What the Fireflies Knew. Good morning and welcome, Kai.
Good morning. Thank you.
So I gotta first just want to congratulate you on writing your first novel and having it so well received. But were you at all shocked by the response to the book? What I'll call the overwhelmingly positive response.
Yes. I've absolutely been shocked. I mean, I dreamed of it. I hoped for it. But once it actually happened, it's really just been amazing for me to see my little book go. So, yeah.
Well, you know, it's not a little book. It's a book that has had an incredible impact. And I love what I've read about you and your determination to just tell a story about Black girlhood. And fortunately, you were able to connect with two Black women who own or run the Tiny Reparations imprint. Tell us how you got connected to these women, because your book seems perfect for them.
Yeah, so I felt the same way, that the book was perfect, but I actually wasn't aware of Tiny Reparations at the time that we reached out to them. That was actually all my agent, Aisha Pandy, who, let me know of some different editors and publishing houses that she thought the book would be a good fit for. But that came after she and I having lots of conversations about what my goals were, what my priorities were, where I wanted to see the book land, those types of things. So she knew what types of things were important to me. She knew that I wanted to be somewhere where my voice would not just be tolerated or, manipulated in some ways, or, you got to shift this around if you want us to publish it. I wanted to go somewhere where my voice would be championed, where I wouldn't have to change myself to get my book out there. And so she found out about Tiny Reparations, and it was just a perfect fit.
Wow, well, I'm so glad she did. And you ended up being the first fiction on Tiny Reparations imprint. So kudos to you and to your agent, obviously, for making that connection. Now, the book is not an autobiography, but there's so many similarities in your own life and in the lives of the two little girls who are featured, particularly the main character, KB. So at any point, did you think about making it a memoir?
I'm not ready to write a memoir yet. Maybe one day. But, I think that when I started writing, I was writing based on my own experience. The book started out as a short story that I wrote in a fiction class during my master's, when I was doing my master's in Nashville. And at the time, I was attempting to write a story based on a memory, just a moment, like a snapshot. And I had this memory of catching fireflies in Lansing when I was growing up. And, I saw it in my head and I thought to myself, okay, I want to try and get this on the page. And so that's where the book started. And from there, I did, completely fictionalize it. I wanted to move away from my own story, my own experiences, and think instead about a character who I could create who could have a rich and compelling story, but in this same setting. So I wanted to keep that setting of Lansing, which is very nostalgic and important to me. And I wanted to put KB there and, see what would happen to her if she spent a summer in this place that I loved so much when I was a kid.
So I know you are a professor that teaches writing to students yourself, and you just mentioned that you were in a writing course. So who are some of the writers that have inspired you?
So many. Probably one of my greatest literary influences is Toni Morrison. So I fell in love with Maya Angelou first. That was the first writer I fell in love with when I was in elementary school, and I became Maya Angelou for the Wax Museum. And that's kind of how I really fell in love with writing in general. And, I started writing a lot of poetry. But I started reading Toni Morrison. It wasn't until college when I started reading Toni Morrison. And I think that was like a big moment of awakening for me. Mm-hmm. But also Jesmyn Ward has been a huge influence in general, but also her book, Salvage the Bones, was a huge influence for me when writing this particular novel.
So I know that, centering Black girlhood and the experiences of Black girls is really important to you. How scary was it to write a book about a topic that mainstream publishing houses have not been very receptive to? I mean, did you worry that there may not even be an audience that was equally passionate about Black girls in the way that you are?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that one thing that was working in my favor is that I wasn't thinking about publishing when I was writing the book. I just wanted to write it. I wanted to have written a book. I had ideas for this story in my mind for a long time, and I just wanted to get it out. And so I think that helped me not thinking about publishing at all, because I wasn't worried about trying to write something that I thought people would, want to read or any of those things. I was just writing the story that I felt like I needed to tell. Once I did decide to publish, I was absolutely terrified that it wasn't going to sell, or, is there a market for this? But I also thought that was pretty ridiculous. I've heard, that publishers have sometimes said that certain things aren't universal or won't be marketable. That's actually something that Phoebe Robinson, who founded Tiny Reparations Books, that's something that she was told. Like, this is too niche. No one's going to read this, because it was, the lens of Black womanhood, which is so strange, because I've read a lot of Black girlhood stories, and, maybe I'm biased because I'm a Black girl, but they feel very universal to me. And one of the main things that I've heard from readers of my book is how much, people can see themselves in the characters, in the family dynamic, in the setting. And these are people who span, all types of identities. I've had, older people, younger people, different genders, different races, everyone, there are so many people who come to me and say, I see myself in KB, or, this sibling dynamic between KB and Mia reminded me of me and my, sibling growing up. So, these stories are universal. And I'm happy that I think that there's a wave right now of writers who are, putting out work, and publishers are listening, and we're showing the world that these stories are universal, just like any other story.
And I'm so glad you mentioned the wide range of people who have, picked the book up, read the book, and love it, because I don't want anyone to think that this book is like a young adult book, or it's only for preteens, because the characters are preteens. You cover so many topics that will resonate with anyone, no matter how old they are. Topics of joy, topics of trauma. Obviously, you deal with issues of race, the family dynamics that you talked about, not just the dynamic between the two siblings, but also what happens when a father figure, or father in this case, dies, and it's a death related to drug overdose, and how the mother handles that. Why that story? I mean, that's probably a story that so many Black folks, particularly if you grew up in an urban part of this country, can identify. Drug addiction, maybe someone dying from drug addiction, and then we learn that the mom actually has some mental health issues. So why that story?
That's a great question. I think that certain things certain things just happened along the way. When I first started writing the book, certain parts of the plot were not there. And I didn't actually start with the beginning of the story. I was writing other parts of the story, and then I came up with some of the ideas for the father and the overdose and that sort of thing. I think that I definitely wanted to explore trauma. I wanted to explore mental health. I wanted to explore some of these kind of generational things that happen in Black families, things that are passed down, things that are kept secret. Those were some of the big themes I wanted to explore. And I think it just became a question of what plot pieces can I put in place that will allow me to talk about these subjects. And some of them were, in those subjects were definitely important to me because of my own childhood and, you know, the ways that I handled growing up and experiencing trauma, and then seeing like what are some of the repercussions of this, but also like what are some of the challenges in the moment. Like I said, like the kind of secret nature of certain things. You know, in our community, it's very common to not talk about really important things. And I mean, you know, they could be happening right in front of you. And so I wanted to write a book from the perspective of a child, of a young person, but the book is for adults. And it's a way for us to see as adults, you know, kids are right there. They're in the midst of everything. If there's trauma in the home, they're aware of it. You know, maybe they don't know exactly what's going on, especially if they're not able to ask questions or talk freely about what's happening. So I wanted to highlight the importance of that. You know, young people are there and they're listening and they're seeing, and we really need to talk to them. We need to listen to them. We need to give them space to ask questions so that they can process, you know, trauma or whatever it is that they're going through right alongside, you know, adults.
No, that's an excellent point. And I think one thing we learned through the book is we're experiencing the story through the eyes of KB, but we are also learning a lot about adults and how adults handle situations, and the realization that kids have to face that their parents aren't perfect, which, you know, can be jolting, right? When you first have to accept that your parents are pretty imperfect people and you have to love them despite their imperfections. Again, that's such an important topic, not often talked about, and probably in most communities, and definitely not in the Black community. Did you have some personal experiences, either yourself growing up or someone maybe that you knew that, you know, had that kind of aha moment about their parents?
I don't want to answer that here. No, I'm just joking.
Let your mom see it. Okay.
Oh, my mom's gonna watch this. Yeah, absolutely. I think we all have those moments. You know, I think it's been really, you know, I think parents always say this thing like, wait till you have kids and then you'll see. And when
we don't have a book, we don't have a playbook, so we do remind our kids.
I was a young person, I was like, oh, whatever. Now I have kids, and she was right. You know, I see I see things from a different perspective, but I also remember what it was like to be a young person. So, you know, I try to balance that in my own parenting. But yeah, you know, I think there are things that when I was young, there were things that I didn't understand about how my mom was parenting. And I would think to myself, like, why didn't she just do this? Or why doesn't she do this instead? Or why didn't she show up in this way that I wanted her to show up? And it wasn't until I got much older that I started to be able to understand some of the reasoning behind that. And then also, yeah, like you said, I mean, parents are not perfect. We're all people. We're all trying to figure it out. And so I think it actually is something that I'm testing out in my own parenting, is trying to show my kids my imperfections more often. I try to, you know, be emotional in front of them, be vulnerable in front of them, admit when I'm wrong to them, you know, all of those things, because I think that it's hard to see and understand that when you're a young person, like, oh, you know, my mom isn't perfect. You know, she's struggling with some of the same things I'm struggling with, or, you know, we're all just trying to figure it out. So I think absolutely I had those aha moments, and, you know, I think my kids will have them too, and it's going to go on and on.
Well, there's also a relationship with KB and her dad. Even though he dies from the drug overdose, you do these flashbacks. Again, was that the relationship that KB has with her father? Any similarities for you in terms of your relationship with your dad?
So that's one of the elements of the book that really doesn't mirror my own story in any real way, outside of the fact that my dad also passed away. But my dad passed away when I was, about 22 or 24. So I was an adult, and it was he had cancer. It's a completely different situation. But I will say that. One thing I didn't expect was how much writing this book would make me feel closer to my dad. I think that when I started writing, I was at a point where I should have been grieving, but I wasn't really grieving. I was actually pretty avoidant. So my dad passed away in my first semester of grad school. And I left school after he passed away because I was in a different state from my family, and his death just rocked me, and I couldn't stay. And so actually, when I wrote the story that became this book, it was when I returned to my grad school program, I think about 3 years later. So it took me a while to get back to what I was doing before his death. So there's something very special in that, I wrote this book in this setting after his death. So there was a lot of me thinking through the grieving process. I was definitely thinking about how grief struck. I have an older sister, and how my dad's death hit each of us differently, how it affected my mom, how it affected my stepmother, how, just thinking of all the ways that we were dealing with that grief differently. That was definitely something that I wanted to put there. But, I think really what I wanted to do with the relationship between KB and her father was really show that although he was flawed, they had a very sweet relationship. And, I didn't want to portray him as, oh, he's just a druggie. He's, not a good dad. He's not a good person because of this. He was someone who was struggling with addiction, and he was a good person, and he was a good dad. And ultimately, KB learns that she says at the end that she, learns a lesson that he wasn't able to learn himself in the end. And that's, her coming to this realization that we can kind of decide for our, we have to decide who we want to be, and we have to fight for that. So yeah, I wanted to just create a real relationship between a dad and his daughters that was flawed, but also had its own sweetness and special moments.
Now, Kai, did you write most of this novel during the pandemic?
So something like that. Timing was interesting. I think I wrote, so after I had written the story in grad school, I wrote the entire first draft of the book at the end of, I believe, 2015 or 2016, one of the two of those. And I wrote it in 30 days. I wrote the first draft really quickly. But at that point, I had been thinking about it so long, I was able to just get it out very fast. Then I think that was 2016, because then I spent the next 3 years revising it. And so I was in my master's program I actually wrote it right in between, I think, my master's and my PhD. So I did a lot of my revision during the PhD process, which was wonderful because I was able to workshop with other writers and with my mentors and get a lot of feedback that ultimately helped me to shape the book. So actually, when the pandemic started, that's actually when I sold the book. So I think,
you finished your revision?
Yeah.
Wow.
I had finished writing. I think I sold the book in June of 2020. So it was shortly after lockdown when I sold the book.
So what I've read about you online is that, a lot of your work is centered around, lifting up and elevating people of color, or Black people in particular. Why young girls? Because, for someone who has that as a part of their mission, it could be men, it could be women, it could be families. But how did you settle on, girlhood?
I think that, honestly, I don't think I had settled on it. I think I was just writing, and then I realized that all of my stories, everything that I was writing kept centering these very similar voices. And so I realized that I think I just had a lot of stories that I wanted to tell from these perspectives. But I hope that what'll happen over the course of my writing career, like I'm working on, a couple different projects right now, and I'm noticing that the voices are like maturing steadily. So we go from, KB, I'm writing something about a high school aged young woman right now. And then I'm also working on a whole nother project right now, and that one is a young adult, a Black woman who's a young adult, and kind of figuring through that stage of life. So I think there will probably be different voices, but I am very drawn to coming of age stories. I've always loved coming of age stories. I think it's such an important, like, we all go through this phase. That's one thing that we'll all always have in common, is that we all have this season of coming of age, no matter what it looks like. There are some similarities across, for all of us when we're thinking about what happens at this stage of our lives. So I love how universal it is. I love how vulnerable it is, how terrifying it is. I think there are lots of stories that can be told from that space, but also, there's something so magical about Black girls. I feel like I could write stories about Black girls and Black women all day long. And I think probably in the beginning, it was really just a factor of, maybe writing what and me feeling comfortable writing a story about a young Black girl because I've been a young Black girl and I was able to pull from, some of my own experiences. But now I'm at the stage where I'm starting to write about characters who have lives and experiences that look very different than mine. But I still find that I can embody their voices in a very deep way. So I think that's something that draws me to writing those stories in particular.
I know it's not an autobiography, but you said there are certain parts of the book that, mirror your own real life experiences. So, what about what the Fireflies knew? What was the hardest part for you to write? Was there any part of the story or the development of any of the characters that was really difficult for you, like on an emotional level?
Yeah. So I mentioned previously that my dad passed away. So also my grandfather, I had my mom's dad, my granddaddy Grady, passed away when I was 12. And so this story so basically the last memory that I have in Lansing was probably around the same age that KB is. So in effect, I'm writing a story about a summer in Lansing at the time that would have been my own last summer in Lansing with my granddaddy. So there's something there that was very complicated. And I did base the granddaddy character a lot on my granddaddy Grady. He's definitely the kind of grumpy granddaddy, but he was very sweet to me and would sing to me and laugh with me and give me lots of money and buy me anything I wanted. And those things are all consistent with him. So that was one part that was difficult, was writing through my own grief from the losses that I'd experienced and trying to write characters and seeing similarities, and that was difficult. I think the other really difficult thing was there's a sexual assault in the novel. Yeah. That was really difficult for me to write, and I actually contemplated several times taking it out of the book. But when I wrote it, I wrote it honestly because as I was just kind of going through with KB and seeing what kinds of things she would do. And she does have a naivete, and she's very believing in other people in ways that I felt like could get her in trouble ultimately. And so as I was writing, it kind of just was like, it just kind of naturally happened, me writing that. And I was like, oh, what's going to happen in this situation? And I was like, I know what's going to happen. And so I wrote it, but then I was like, I want to take this out. I want to take this out. And I kept thinking about taking it out, but I was just doing a lot of research around, sexual assault, and how many Black girls experience sexual assault. And it's a very high number. And I think what I ultimately decided was this is a part of this experience, unfortunately. And if I'm writing about Black girlhood, I did feel like it's unfortunately a part of a lot of those stories. And so I decided to keep it, and I wanted to focus a lot on showing that KB is going to have to heal and in what ways she's going to have to heal. We don't get to see all of that happen on the page because this happens towards the end of the novel. Right. But I wanted to show those first steps, especially this scene with Mia towards the end of the novel where she decides to tell her sister about what happens to her. And I think that's an important, I think I wanted to show that, show that being modeled, this sense of community, of, ultimately in all of these different ways that they're trying to figure out and navigate grief and trauma and assault and, different things. The one common factor is that they have to support one another. They have to tell each other what's going on or they're not going to, get through it. And KB's actually the one that kind of champions that movement because the other folks in her family are kind of like, stay in your place, be a little kid. We don't talk about that. These are the things we don't talk about. And she's just bumping up against that constantly. She's asking Granddaddy a million questions. She's in Mia's face. She's like, what's going on? What are you feeling? Why are you upset? She's trying to get information from Mom, even though her mother's away, she's trying to still get information from her. So KB ends up influencing all of them to come to this realization, like, yo, we need to talk about this stuff. Mama and Granddaddy have had a rift for, the kids' whole lives. And, a big part of that is that they hadn't talked to one another about what happened. So I wanted to show, I did, include some things that were very difficult for me to write, but I hope that by writing them and then modeling how we can heal, how we can move forward, I hope that could be beneficial for people who might be navigating, those same or similar challenges.
Yeah, it's interesting that this 11-year-old girl, this preteen, takes on that leadership role in her family. And we know that happens a lot in families, particularly Black families. Oftentimes, the young girls, because of the trauma, because of the familial relationships, have to grow up pretty quickly. And growing up pretty quickly means doing just that. It's, trying to get folks to open up about those quote-unquote taboo topics. So what's the big takeaway, Kai? What do you want the adults who are going to read this book to take away from it?
I think that one of the biggest takeaways that I'm hoping people will get from the book is just that young people are so important and so smart and so aware. And also there's this big potential for change as we look from generation to generation. KB, when she makes friends with the white kids across the street from her, Bobby and Charlotte, she is wanting to have a relationship with them despite what her grandfather is telling her has historically been, an issue in these types of relationships. And she's thinking, that's not going to matter for us. We're different than that. And, her friends, unfortunately, struggle to prove that. But, there is this hopeful nature at the end that they will come around, that they will, Granddaddy says to their mom, let them decide who they want to be for themselves. Mm-hmm. And so I think that was one of the really big takeaways that I wanted to get across, is just that there can be a shift, even if there are, generational curses or traumas or, things that are being passed down from generation to generation in a family. It can stop, and, however that happens, maybe it does happen through the younger generation, but also Granddaddy is, the elder in this family, and he's the person that really is able to turn things around because he hears KB and he accepts what she's saying to him, and he starts to begin to shift. He starts trying to understand things that he didn't understand before. So yeah, I wanted to show that these family dynamics, again, another thing about the novel that's very universal, because we all have families and we probably all have family drama and, things that we are trying to figure out. And I wanted to show that we can get through these things. It takes a mindset shift. It takes awareness. It takes communication, but we can work through these things. And a lot of times we, might have to listen to someone who we're not used to listening to, like our kids, or like, and being open-minded to the fact that we all know things. We all can bring something to this dynamic that could be useful or helpful in some way. And we just have to put in the work to get to that point together.
Yeah, I think that's such a beautiful message for parents, because oftentimes we forget, as you said, that our kids, they're smart, they're intuitive, they have a lot that we can learn from them. We just have to be open to and have to be willing to let them be their authentic selves. And we have to be willing to change. And sometimes change is difficult for adults, particularly when the kids seem to be modeling behaviors that are sometimes even better than the behaviors of the adults. Thank you so much for writing this book. Thank you so much for lifting up Black girlhood and having a determination about this and not allowing any messages that may be in the universe about what's going to be a popular topic, what may not be a popular topic, to stop you. So I'm sure the response from what the Fireflies knew, I hope that response, the positive response, encourages and inspires and motivates you to tell more of these super important stories.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
All right, best of luck to you with those new projects, and we'll have to have you back once you get get some of those other projects completed, because they sound like they're going to be really interesting. And I'd love to see how you tackle subjects, like you said, that have no similarities to your own experiences, but also what happens in your young adult characters. I really can't see that happen. So
me too.
Forward to having you back. Thank you, Kai.
Thank you so much.
I just want to thank my guest, author Kai Harris. I should call her Dr. Harris because she actually has a PhD. She's a professor at Santa Clara University. She has really done something that's pretty difficult to do as a first-time writer, and that's get an agent and get a book deal with a major publishing house. So even though Tiny Reparations is an imprint, it's an imprint of one of the top 5 publishing companies in the nation. And as a writer myself, I know how difficult it is to get that kind of publishing deal. So just hats off to her for having the kind of tenacity that it takes to get in that kind of contract, and also to write about a topic, as she said, that some people thought, or maybe even continue to think, there isn't an audience for, which is completely ridiculous and not true, because Black women, we are some of the most, avid readers. We purchase huge amounts. We may be, number 1, number 2 in terms of who buys and reads books. So I know if there's a book about young Black girls, if there's a book about parenting and relationships as it relates to Black girls, I know Black women are there for it. So, thank you again, Dr. Harris, for writing this book, and I just wish her the best of luck. Make sure you pick up a copy of Kai Harris's book, What the Fireflies Knew, and it's important for all of us. These books get written and these stories get told and these deals get done because we go out and we support Black authors, we support first-time authors, we support female authors like Dr. Harris. Just some quick words to live by before I get out. These are from the great author Toni Morrison, who is one of the inspirations for Dr. Harris's writing. And I saw this quote from Toni Morrison, and it just resonated with me. So I want to share it with you. The book to read is not the one that thinks for you, but the one that makes you think. Let that sink in. Be safe out there. Remember, we're all in this together.